Hello ladies and gentlemen, Willie here. Today I wanted to do a little something on comments that I see pretty frequently, if I'm honest. All over the internet too, forums, in-game, Reddit, you name it, it's everywhere. Someone new to the game or returning asks how a particular class or maybe a spec is to play, and you always get a variety of answers with the words viable, optimal, or even suboptimal thrown in there. And it often feels like people use them pretty interchangeably, especially when you people say, for example, Moonkin, Retribution, or Enhancement aren't viable DPS in Classic, because they are. What they aren't is optimal. Viable being capable of working successfully, optimal being best or most favourable. You've probably all tried endgame in Classic, or at least seen enough of the content to know it's easy, really easy. The amount of just viable specs you would have to bring along to actually start having a challenge would be enormous. I mean, people have cleared Molten Core with 40 Paladins, Druids, and Shamans. Bringing suboptimal classes at this point isn't really a hindrance at all, and so often I hear viable when people mean optimal. Just look at how differently people measure top-end performance in Retail versus Classic. Retail, there is a world first race that can last for weeks sometimes. Players prepare multiple different classes in advance for certain fights, or even to class stack to be able to ignore one specific mechanic. After progress is over and it's on farm, people do pass runs to try and get the highest DPS ranks possible on bosses, but this isn't anywhere near as big of a deal as the progress race. In Classic, the content essentially releases on farm. Top guilds want to get the first clear, of course, but it takes second place to speedruns. And you can only have 2 speedruns every few weeks because of the Darkmoon Fair buff. 10% damage is too much to pass up on. What about boss passes then? Unlike Retail, nobody really cares. Players measure overall raid damage instead of just against bosses. You have 2 raiding scenes and both are measured completely differently by the player base. It's pretty interesting, right? And players really have a habit of looking at what people who are taking the game way more seriously than them are doing and trying to copy them. From Retail, where the game is very execution heavy on mechanics and DPS checks early on, to Classic, where we stack up our world buffs, get half a dozen potions and bring along as many rank 14 warriors as you can physically get your hands on. Just take a look at all the top speedruns for raids. Most of them have 20 plus melee DPS classes and only around 7 or so ranged. Now, you may bring up that class balance has a big factor in this too. People like being at the top of the meter. It takes a certain kind of person to play a spec. You would need a DPS meter stretching from the top of your screen to the bottom to appear on. And well, yeah, warrior, rogue, mage, and then all the other classes is the way to go, right? Especially if you're measuring by full raid performance. Well, at least in Retail, Blizzard do a much better job of, actually, let me take that back. Man, Enhance, Ret and Feral, these specs just can't catch a break, can they? Can't quite say the same for Shadow though. Speaking of Retail, however, it does have hard content. Content which is absolutely made more difficult depending on even small changes to your raid setup. Now, there is a much higher skill level needed for top end raiding in Retail in my opinion. Not saying Classic is easy at the top end, there's more to it than you'd think, with world buffs up the risk of pushing DPS because threat is a thing, limited attempts due to Darkmoon Fair, reacting on the fly to taunt resist. It's just Retail has more going for it overall. Retail also being 20-man means your leeway for who you bring along is literally halved. Often, just a tiny little bit more DPS is enough to push you from avoiding that boss mechanic or the next ad spawn, or allowing you to transition to the next phase at the right time. And you just look at the DPS meter here. If I have a Shadow Priest and an Affliction lock on the bench, and instead we're playing a Feral Druid and a Warrior in a fight, and our raid is falling short on DPS, well, it's not a hard decision to make, is it? At certain points, classes or specs are just not viable for the content and their lack of performance, which is noticeably holding the entire raid back, which isn't a good place to be in. You can even put an amazing player on a very weak class and they could struggle versus a less skilled player on a stronger class, and that's without even considering good player plus good class. Bringing it back around to Classic though, and looking forwards to TBC, you often hear that a large improvement is now that every class is viable in raids, which I think they already are. In fact, it's more a case of your raid leader is now incentivized to bring along these previously suboptimal classes, and that their performance comparatively to Classic is better. There's still a big old gap from the top classes like your Warlocks and Hunters to those nearer the bottom. It's just that instead of only doing mediocre damage, now you're doing mediocre damage whilst making the top DPS do more damage. which is the exact reason why you see so few of them in Classic. They just don't offer anything unique which is worth bringing. You only see one Druid in speedruns for Classic, you spam Fairy Fire on anything that moves because it makes Warrior do more damage, or one Warlock where you spam Curse of Recklessness on everything so that Warrior do more damage, and class stacking is so heavy with melee that this becomes very beneficial because 40-man raids. You have to consider, is a buff and performance that a class brings more beneficial to the raid as a whole than just bringing another class that has better baseline performance? Is the 5% spell crit from Moonkin Aura and Innovate worth more than just having another Warlock in the caster group? Warlocks scale up very well off each other too with improved Shadow Bolt, could be a near permanent 20% damage buff, that's a big deal, but this is just the top end stuff of course. Your average raid will probably consider it, but not play around it nearly as much, though I can't help feeling that raid sheets will appear with you need X setup and people will just follow that setup because it's optimal. And that's where Viable can struggle because players really like to be optimal. I can honestly say I've never seen a guild recruitment message, a pug advertisement, or an LFG where people are saying we need a rep pally, we need more balanced druids, that's going to be our key to success. People even meme on or get actually mad when they see unviable DPS with great gear, Moonkin with Neltharion's Tear, Enhancement with Dark Edge of Insanity, how dare they take warrior gear away from others. There's actually some weight behind this though. Why would you give a top tier item to a class that benefits the raid overall a tiny amount compared to one of the top DPSs? What's your argument there then? You're just here for fun? Sounds like casual talk to me. Classic hasn't presented a difficulty level that truly makes any class unviable in my opinion. Well, maybe if you really tried to class stack some specs you might struggle, but I can't help feeling you sorta know what you're getting yourself into if you're doing that. Will TBC then? Even pre-nerf? I'm gonna say no, I doubt it. The big difference is people will be saying recruiting one Moonkin, or one Rep Pally, or more than one Shadow Priest. And for class and spec diversity in raids, it's a fantastic thing to happen. It's just, well, you're there for a buff or debuff, right? You should know that. When you hear Moonkin, Ret, Enhance, even in Classic not being viable for DPS, it's just not true. Even though their overall contribution will be tiny compared to a geared warrior, what people are saying is they are not optimal, which is very much the case. And optimizing is different from raid to raid, guild to guild, and it depends on what level you are performing at in the content. So yeah, just felt like going over that today. Basically, play what you want when it comes to a class spec, just don't always expect the same ride when it comes to being priority on loot, or having the same opportunities as others for finding groups. You are definitely making your life harder by choosing a suboptimal class or spec. People don't like hearing this, but I'd be remiss not to mention it. Oh, and things will improve in TBC for certain. So any off-spec meta players here, how has your experience been in Classic? Hit me up below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one very soon. If you like what you see, do give the video a like and subscribe, as there will be plenty more to come. Thank you guys all so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.